Welcome everyone to episode 143 of the Send Nutrition Podcast with your host Bryan and Peter today. And today's topic is resistant starch, a natural prebiotic and superfood for your horse. How are you, Peter?
Bryan, I'm excellent. I've got one thing to say to you, Bryan. I'm actually really proud of you. You know why? Because you've been sober longer than a priest.
That's right. I might give our listeners an update. And yes, I've had a break from alcohol for over 40 days now. And yeah, you just say I'm a bit more clear and the mind is good. But I think Tom Quilty next week might break that spell.
I think you've been saving yourself up, Bryan, for when we travel over to the National Championships for Australia, the Tom Quilty. I think it's from the 9th or 10th of May.
Yeah, that's right. We're really looking forward to catching up with everyone in the endurance world. And I think, I don't think I'll be able to avoid any drinks, but it's all good. Everything in moderation. Yeah, this podcast was brought about by Peter and I letting the cat out of the bag, you'd say, in previous podcasts discussing resistant starch. And it was in that Why Faba Beans is Better Than Lupin podcast. And we've had a really good response to this podcast and listeners actually asking questions regarding, can you elaborate more on that resistant starch? And that's why we're here today.
Yeah, sort of human terms, what resistant starch is low GI foods, basically. So we'll cover, obviously, today what is resistant starch and obviously the benefits for horses. It's not the be all and end all, obviously, for horse food, but it plays a very critical role, especially horses that are prone to laminitis or any sort of older horses as well.
Yeah, it's a really good aspect or healthy aspect for a horse to have in their diet. And it was that upgrade with the ingredients that we did with the Ultimate, going from the lupin bean to the faba bean, because lupins are very, very low in starch, so they don't contain that level of resistant starch that is beneficial, unlike the faba bean, which has that levels in that 10, 20, 30% resistant starch. And deep dive the research and the processes around this to try and get our listeners to understand the way it's digested in the horse and how it can help their overall health.
Yeah, when we obviously flicked over from, the lupin-based formula to the faba bean-based formula, we sort of found a diamond in the rough with the resistant starch. And when we first sort of bumped into it, it was like, wow, what's this? And we really had to dive down into the research and sort of get our facts right before we ended up doing a podcast on it. But in summary, what resistant starch is, it's a type of carbohydrate that resists digestion in the small intestine and ferments in the hindgut. So it's essentially starch that acts like fiber, passing through the digestive system largely unchanged until it reaches the colon where where the beneficial gut bacteria take over.
And I think some of our listeners may remember that, yes, a horse is a fiber fermenter first, but what we're saying today is they are also starch fermenters. And it takes a little bit of understanding to get our head around this. So I think the most easiest way to explain it is if you take normal starch, for example, in a horse, it's digested in the small intestine and it's broken down into sugars and used as energy. And that energy, depending on the horse, can be a good form of that fast energy release. And a horse will have an insulin response from this, and it's known as that quick fuel. Whereas resistant starch, instead of being digested in the small intestine, bypasses the small intestine into the hindgut of the horse, where it ferments down into short-chain fatty acids by the good bacteria. And this really helps improve the gut health, but also gives the horse some moderate energy, which doesn't have an insulin response.
Absolutely right, Bryan. It also works in a way that it's food for the good bacteria in that hindgut, basically, which works as a natural prebiotic. So you get the natural prebiotic out of the resistant starch. In our grain-free product, we've obviously got an additional prebiotic in that pellet, as long with a probiotic. So in essence, you're getting two strains of a prebiotic with the resistant starch and obviously the additive prebiotic that we add as well.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. When you look at resistant starch and the fermentation in the hindgut compared to fiber fermentation, it's actually a moderate release energy compared to a fiber fermentation, which is a more slower release energy. Both are very good for gut health and really promote calmer behavior. And it really works in well and complements the normal starch levels for a performance horse.
Yeah, look, some of our listeners, obviously, that have got horses that are prone to laminitis, that, were a little bit worried initially about using the new faba bean-based product, haven't had any issues at all. And what we put it down to is the resistant starch aspect of it. And Bryan mentioned it's between sort of 10 and 30%. So if we, hit the sort of middle ground, 15, 20%, that's pretty much a prebiotic that, that you're feeding to your horse. If you've got a horse that's prone to laminitis, say we're 12.8% on the bag, it's not 12.8% starch. There's a high proportion of that's going to be resistant starch, which actually helps your horse rather than hinder your horse if that was just straight starch going through the small intestine.
Yeah, that's right, Pete. And you can really see the results with our laminitic or metabolically challenged horses getting the result with the Sen Ultimate and also the Sensia 50. And as we know, they're all individuals and we treat them as such when we look at the volume of feed going in, which makes both feeds totally safe for that metabolically challenged horse. In summary, for resistant starch, you could say compared to the fiber fermentation, it is more energy dense and metabolically efficient, so it is safe and more gut friendly than regular starch. And it's only probably in the high performance, say the racing industry, they're the ones that are sort of prone to overdoing the grain, which is 50 to 70% starch, those levels. It's that pure volume that the small intestine is overloaded, and then that normal starch reaching the hindgut can make it really acidic and play havoc with the good microbes, and then that affects fiber fermentation, and then you have a cascade of health issues that result from this.
Yeah, that's well summarised, Bryan. Bryan, would you say that resistant starch is covered in a Superman cape?
Yes. You'd have to say that when it doesn't get broken down in the small intestine.
Well, in essence, it's a form of starch that doesn't break into glucose, basically. So you've got the benefits of starch, but you don't have those high insulin spikes. So it's basically the best of both.
It's even so important that there's other companies out there, we won't name them because they might get a free ride. They've built whole companies on this. And you might be familiar with a company that bases their ingredient product around the green banana. I think that's a worldwide product as well, and using that as a prebiotic. So if you have been considering feeding that, or you already consider it, if you do feed the Sen feed products, we have an aspect of that in our product. So you're getting a really good dose of that resistant starch for your horse.
As our long-time customers know, and even sort of new people to the podcast, Bryan and I are pretty much never asleep at the wheel, and we're always looking to improve. So when we did flick over to the faba bean, obviously, as the raw ingredient, the kernel and the hull, which we use both, the diamond in the rough basically was the resistant starch. And I think we've got to a point now where the results that we're getting, and it's not just the performance side, it's the endurance side. Obviously, congratulations to Ashley and Tosca in New Zealand for first and second in the National Endurance Championship over 160 kilometres. We know that 75-80% of the horse's health is in its gut. So if you're feeding a feed daily, that's giving that gut resistant starch, which is in essence food for the microbes. On a daily basis, those microbes are going to get healthier, stronger, which are only going to benefit the gut, benefit the bacteria in there, and benefit the immune system, which is the powerhouse for the horse.
Yeah, so when we looked at that ingredient formula for us, it's faba beans in and lupins out, because when you look at lupins, they're very low in starch, too low for that performance horse. So the faba bean has this well over it with a calmer energy source, which partially is fermented in the hindgut. So you're getting the best of both worlds, a higher digestible energy per kg and getting more hindgut nourishment more than the lupin previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think I mentioned in the Faba Bean podcast as well that there's companies out there that have got pellets using just the lupin hulls. So the digestible energy is going to be like 8 megajoules, which is next to nothing. There'll be absolutely no resistant starch in the hulls. Obviously a lot of that resistant starch in a lupin, which is 1%, would be in the kernel, not the hull. And if you're feeding pretty much a straight lupin, you got to watch the protein. It's 30-35% protein. The digestible energy is quite high, but if you're feeding a lucerne hay or a grassy lucerne on top of a straight lupin, your protein's going to be through the roof, and you really got to watch where that protein goes.
Yeah, definitely balancing legumes is really tricky, and cracked lupins are adapted into our diet, but that's when you have a grassy hay that is really lacking protein, and we can really adapt this for the individual horse's diet. But in essence, and adding on to what Peter said, lupins don't contribute, or a lupin-based product doesn't contribute to the glucose replenishment or the high energy demands in the same way as the faba beans, like we have transitioned, because as in previous podcasts, we had to add more carbohydrates on top to bring that starch level up, whereas now we don't have to add as much, or we can even avoid adding the grain on top to meet the energy needs of that horse.
I think with the previous product, we probably went too far almost, whether you call it to the right or to the left, where we're like, oh, it's got to be, grain-free, it's got to have no sugar, it's got to have no starch, no nothing. But then, you hit in the middle of winter in Victoria or Tasmania where it's like -5, and a horse, there's just not enough calories in a very low sugar, in a very low starch feed. So you're going to be battling to maintain weight, let alone put weight on. And, that's when with the performance side, we had to go back to some of our customers and go, well, look, add the oats because there's not enough sugar there, sugar starch. So you can go too far to one side. And then what happens is you're forced then to add another grain-based feed or another grain like oats to bring up that actual sugar and starch. So it's at a level where the horse won't drop condition. So Bryan mentioned a beautiful thing with this faba bean product is that we have got starch in there. I think it's about 12.8 starch and about 1 point something sugar. So we're well under that 15%. But if, 15, 20, 25% of that 12.8 is resistant starch, then a portion of that is going into the gut to feed the microbes. Plus you're getting the residual energy from the starch to replenish the glycogen stores for those customers that are, in performance, whether they're in endurance, whether they're in show jumping, dressage, thoroughbreds, harness racing, whatever that may be. There's enough starch in the new product to replenish those glycogen stores, saving those people buying another product to top up the glycogen stores like they had to do with our previous lupin-based product.
Yeah, that's well said, Pete. And I think overall for our listeners, to really summarize it down and what resistant starch is, it resists digestion in the small intestine and ferments in the hindgut instead, like we just stated. And the benefits for your horse is it supports the healthy gut fermentation, produces those short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, which helps fuel the colon cells and improve gut health. Also provides the horse with a calmer, cooler energy source than normal starch. And then it also helps that blood sugar regulation, and especially for those metabolically challenged horses, really beneficial in that way.
Yeah, it pretty much travels the same pathways as what fiber does. So we got a lot of customers that love feeding high fiber feeds. In essence, resistant starch pretty much travels the same way and gives the same benefits as what a high fiber feed does. The issue is, as I just mentioned previously, if your feed is just high in fiber without any sugar and starch, leading into the winter time, you're going to be battling to maintain weight unless you're feeding a high sugar hay.
Yeah, 100%, Pete. We like to focus on the hindgut of the horse being one of the most important parts to feed properly, and it's according to physiology. Our feeds are designed around science, which is that physiology and makeup of the horse's body. And when you focus on this, everything else, including behavior, their immune system, even their efficiency to digest their fiber source, which is the roughage source that should be at least 1.5% of their body weight in kgs per day. If they can digest this more efficiently, then you're ticking all the right boxes to have your horse thrive.
Yeah, Bryan, I'd like to give an example. You and I were both part with one of our long-standing harness customers in Australia, and they've just changed over from a teff hay to an oaten hay. And what we did is we asked for a sample, we sent that out to the lab, got it analysed, and look, the results we got, we were expecting, but the protein was really low. I think it dropped down to below 8%. The water-soluble carbohydrates, I think, were around about 21, 22. So we know that the sugar is there. All we did was basically added an extra kilo of the grain-free, make sure there's plenty of sen oil in there. I think we might have even added a kilogram of lupins just for the very poor protein levels, just to bring it up, because these guys were racing every week, pretty much, 48 weeks of the year, 52 weeks of the year. I think it might have been, break for Christmas or whatever. But, you just got to balance it depending on what your hay is. Bryan has mentioned, the roughage is the foundation. Rather than putting a cart before the horse, you got to look at what the horse is going to be eating the most amount of, which is always going to be roughage. And then we tailor make the diet around that roughage. So if they were using a Rhodes grass previously, there'll be no need for the lupins because that's got a little bit more protein. So it's not a one size fits all. We got to look at exactly what roughage they're feeding and then basically work our way down from there.
Yeah, being a feed company, we like to focus on that roughage because this hindgut of the horse is around 60% of their digestive tract. And if this isn't fed properly, you're going to be really prone to all those digestive upsets. And we want to really lower the risk of colic and laminitis in this as well. So looking at the hindgut and just zeroing down in that aspect and understanding it, it takes 24 to 72 hours for the feed to move past this section. So this is the part of the horse where the cecum, which is between the small intestine and the large intestine, the cecum onwards into the large colon, small colon, and then out the rectum, that's the hindgut of the horse. It's basically a big fermentation vat, and this is what the horse's main energy source is. It's not the hard feed that you're feeding. That's to balance the nutrients going in. That's why, as Pete said before, the roughage of your horse is the most important part of their diet. So the hindgut is home to trillions of microbes, and they're mainly what we're trying to do with the fiber is to promote the good bacteria in there because 70% of the immune system is in there as well, and they're also producing their feel-good hormones. So there's big links between the gut and brain connection with that gut-brain axis, and getting the hindgut right can really help the behavior and focus of your horse in training.
Look, the beautiful thing with the grain-free ultimate, obviously with the faba beans that we're using, is that we're still getting the 35-36% fiber, but out of that starch in that product, 20-25%, let's just say it's going to be resistant starch. So the fiber is feeding the healthy gut microbes, the resistant starch is feeding the healthy gut microbes. You're getting a portion of that starch to replenish glycogen stores. You're getting a very good protein. I think it's 12-13%. And it's quite high digestible energy. So legumes, beans in general have a pretty high digestible energy. Sometimes similar to oats, give and take depending on the oat quality. So very seldom is there going to be a need to feed additional grains on top of the ultimate. And look, if your diet's based on a lucerne or a grassy lucerne or maybe even a clover hay, there's no need for any other feeds apart from the grain-free ultimate.
100%, Peter. We're here to try and simplify as many horse diets as possible because we still get half-page reports on what people are feeding and then trying to get through that noise and see what they're doubling up to get a better result in the end by feeding less but better quality.
Look, I'm finding the consults that I've been doing is there's a bit of a pattern there that's happening. So people will start with a good intention and then someone will tell them to add this because they're starting to experience this symptom. And then on top of the first symptom, there'll be a second symptom. So then something else is added. And then it's a third, fourth, fifth. There might be 8, 9 deep, and they haven't addressed the root cause of the problem, which is at pretty much number one. So there was something that was unbalanced at the very beginning, and then over time, that unbalancing, and it might be not enough zinc and copper, and the iron has been overloaded, or there might be too much phosphorus, not enough calcium. They might be feeding a high oxalate hay. If that's not addressed at the very beginning, over time, that deficiency is going to compound, and then symptoms are going to start coming out. If you don't catch yourself in time, you might be 8, 9, symptoms deep, 8, 9 products deep, and then like the horse is, basically battling. And then, we've got a couple of those phone calls and literally we've had to strip it back, try to get down to the root cause of the problem. And 9 times out of 10, there's always some sort of deficiency or there's an overload of something and there's not enough of something else.
Yeah, it's really on that individual basis what comes in, but we find it very valuable going over that horse owner's specific profiles. And if you are wondering how you can simplify your diet, feel free to book a free diet consult in our online through our website. And when we look at the whole horse landscape, Sen has really prided ourselves on trying to simplify as many diets as possible and get that end result. And I think, Pete, we're doing something right because the success in many horse industries is really showing through now.
Look, and we're very proud as well with the pricing that we've got. Like at the very beginning when we first kicked off the company, we were probably at that sort of top end, top shelf Johnny Walker sort of prices in stores. But
the blue,
the blue, yeah, not the red. Come on, Bryan. Hair of the dog, for the red.
hey, just a side note. I heard going on the highballs. What's the highballs?
Yeah, in Japan. Yeah, from our recent trip to Japan, we got hooked on the Japanese highballs. So all the people that have been to Japan that know that what a highball is, I think it's 1 part whiskey and 3 or 4 parts soda water with a little bit of lemon or lime.
A little bit of hydration in there with the soda water.
Well, there is. It takes you a little while to get drunk, but then the next day you're good because of all the water you've drunk as well. So
that's a bit of a whiskey side note there.
Yeah. So just getting back to the topic. So we're very proud now that we're sitting around about $55 around Australia for the grain-free ultimate. And that's nowhere near the top shelf. We're probably in a more affordable price bracket, which now has given us access to a lot of customers where previously the price point we would not have reached. So the customer is actually getting a better product, especially with this resistant starch. The fiber's still very good. The protein's still very good. We have got human grade ingredients. The consistency of our product doesn't change that much because we do use only the one raw ingredients. Where it does fluctuate sometimes with a natural ingredient, faba beans come in different shapes, sizes, colors. One might be lighter, one might be darker. We don't use an oil through our product. We don't use a molasses through our product. When you use an oil and molasses, you can disguise the different color variations, which then makes it look like one color. We're not about that, okay? We want to keep it as natural as possible. We're not adding any unnecessary fillers or anything like that just to make it look nice and beautiful. It's in a natural product. So we find that's what's got us to this point. Both Bryan and I are very pleased that the national pricing, rural areas might be a little bit more understandable because obviously the freight up there can be a little bit higher. But in general, we're getting really, really good feedback with price point. A lot of the stores are happy that they've got ample supply through our national distributors as well.
Yeah, we've had really recent feedback that some produce stores can't keep it on the shelves. So I think it's that word of mouth and the results and the success and confidence in the product is what's really driving this. And then when you look at even the top elite horses, these endurance horses, the trainer who has won the Tom Quilty Gold Cup in the last 2 years, Jolene Cole, she said it really nicely in a comment on Facebook, and I'll read it out. She said, "There is no greater test of a horse's metabolic ability than 160 kilometers with 7 thorough vet checks. Congratulations to Sen for once again providing a trusted nutrition source that takes away any worries about the horse's largest requirement, which is nutrition." And Jolene is one of our biggest supporters, but this has come through her success and her testimony of how Sen has really helped simplify the horse's diet for her, and she has the confidence and the trust in our ingredients to get the job done, and she's going to go for a 3rd national title in a row in Tasmania next week. So I think when you know that you can get the result at the elite level, it all trickles down to that, maybe that paddock ornament or even a sensitive horse. We have the confidence that we can get the right puzzle pieces in store for their nutrition.
Yeah, Bryan, it's very well said. We say regularly on the podcast that in that 160 kilometre endurance event, you don't have anywhere to hide. I mean, I've got the utmost respect for those endurance riders. The amount of training and effort that they put into it, literally, if you get your nutrition wrong, if you get your training wrong, if your horse is dehydrated before the event slightly, you are not going to finish. So if you can actually finish the event, congratulations, let alone win the event. And I mean, win it 2 years in a row, possibly a three-peat, fingers crossed. But everyone that competes, and Bryan and I are going to be there in Tasmania for the 2025 event, and we're looking forward to meeting all the supporters and even people that have got any difficult questions to ask. Bryan and I, we don't hide from difficult questions.
Yeah, even if you don't feed our products, we just love talking about horse nutrition and horse training, and their physiology fascinates us, and this is our passion, that we want to help as many horse owners as possible understand our theory and our mantra. And yeah, we don't mind if you feed a competitor's product. We can help in that way and really get the end result you want with another opinion. Just to wrap this podcast up, we can leave you with a few thoughts of why resistant starch matters for your horse. Horses evolved to ferment fiber, and resistant starch is a bridge between energy and fiber digestion. as we've just outlined. And the inclusion of the faba beans in the Sen Grain-Free Ultimate, it offers a more calm, steady energy for work and recovery. It improves the gut health and feed efficiency. That leads to better manure consistency and less digestive upsets. So this overall profile of ingredients is a more natural and holistic profile for all classes of horses.
That's extremely well summarised, Brian. I don't have too much further add to that, but we do offer the free diet consult. So if you did like this podcast, you can jump on our website and book a free diet consult. There's myself, Brian, and Nicole, who's doing a splendid job doing a lot of the consults, while we've been away, and obviously we'll be going away again. This product is good for performance horses too, guys. So whether you're in harness or sort of thoroughbreds or even dressage show jumping, don't think just because it's a grain-free product it's going to be lacking energy. With the addition of the starch and a resistant starch, you can actually get that energy up without worrying about high gut acidosis or like getting those ulcers and what so forth. So it is very suitable as a performance product as well. We can look into your diet depending on the roughage that you're feeding, what calories might be short, what we need to add, what we don't. And also, I think we're about 119 five-star reviews on Spotify. Brian's promised that if we can get that up to 130 before the Tom Quilter, he's going to hammer the Long Island iced teas every day for the 3 days. So we'll get his liver back on track for all those days that he's missed out on.
He's had a nice rest, but I think I want to give a couple of shout outs because we have had comments left on Spotify regarding episode 142, which was using fat to increase horse performance. And I'll thank JHJ Harris 00 for her comment saying this is the best podcast ever. And also Kaz Jam, she said this was a fascinating episode and thank you. And we thank you guys for all your support. As Peter said, just drop that 5-star review. It just helps that Spotify ranking. But we are one of the most popular horse nutrition podcasts in Australia. Over 120,000 listens now. And we just can't thank you guys enough for your support and encouragement, even over the phone when you guys call the office and want to have a chat to us. So thanks again for all your support. I think we'll just leave it there, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.